Jerome Bennett gets the hand up. And what about Zach Thomas?
What a great hit by Zach Thomas, filling the hole. Zach keeps that low center of gravity. He's short anyway, makes that great hit.
And he can read, too, Tom. Stewart throws it in the gut. No, it's in the gut of Thomas. It's a touchdown.
If you're a Miami Dolphins fan, this will just be preaching to the choir. But if you're a fan of another team or just simply don't know the story of Zach Thomas, then hopefully this will be a video that you can share and be informed on why the Dolphins fans have been pounding the table for this man to be in the Hall of Fame for years now. A dominant middle linebacker of his era. Today I will be diving into his career by examining how his stats stack up, the broader impact of those stats, and testimonials from his peers. But before we do that, I'd like to take a minute to give a brief synopsis of Zach Thomas's career. Thomas played college ball at Texas Tech University, where in his junior year he was selected as first-team All-American. And then in his senior year, he was named unanimous first-team All-American, the Southwest Conference Defensive Player of the Year, and a finalist for the Butkus Award. Thomas was then invited to the NFL Combine, where he did not excel. Zach Thomas is not the most physically gifted player, and the Combine does not treat those players kindly. Many scouting experts claimed that the 5'11", 242-pound linebacker was too small, too slow, and too unathletic to play at the professional level. The Miami Dolphins special teams coordinator would scout him for use on his special teams, and ended up liking him enough to recommend him to coach Jimmy Johnson. So, in the 1996 NFL Draft, in the 5th round, after 18 other linebackers came off the board, and not even being the Dolphins' first choice, having drafted the Curtis Jones a round earlier, Zach Thomas finally came off the board at pick 154. To say there was a chip on Zach Thomas's shoulder would be an understatement. And like every great player, he took that as fuel and he absolutely ran with it. After signing a 3-year league minimum contract, Thomas tore his way up the depth chart in training camp, and by August had landed himself as the starting middle linebacker, so much so that the Dolphins released veteran linebacker Jack Del Rio, who was originally planned to be the starter. Thomas would go on to put the league on notice his rookie year. I'll dive into his stats later on in this video, but let's just say it was good enough to earn him all-rookie selection and be selected as a Pro Bowl alternate. That year, he would also finish second in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting, behind defensive end Simeon Rice and above linebacker Ray Lewis. And I remind you, that's not just from popularity, this man was a 5th-round draft pick of the Miami Dolphins. Thomas would remain the starter at middle linebacker of the Miami Dolphins for the next decade. However, in 2007, his season would be cut short after a series of concussions left him with lingering migraine headaches that placed him on injured reserve. Following the season, he would be cut by the Miami Dolphins at age 35. The Dallas Cowboys would sign Thomas on a 1-year deal where he played in a 3-4 defense for the first time, and his numbers were modest. In 2009, the Kansas City Chiefs would sign Thomas to a 1-year deal, but after suffering yet another concussion in training camp, Zach Thomas was let go. And on May 18, 2010, Thomas signed a $1 deal to officially retire as a member of the Miami Dolphins. With his career now summarized, let's take an in-depth look at the stats and numbers that made his career so special. For the purposes of this video, I will be comparing Zach Thomas to Hall of Fame linebackers of his era. For the most part, those were 2 middle linebackers in Ray Lewis, who played from 1996 to 2012, and Brian Urlacher, who played from 2000 to 2012. I also compared him to 2 Hall of Fame outside linebackers from his era, those being Derek Brooks, who played from 1995 to 2008, and Junior Seau, who played from 1990 to 2009. A few other Hall of Fame linebackers are mentioned throughout this video as well, but those 4 are my main comparison baselines. So with that being said, let's just dive into it, starting by taking a look at the linebackers' solo tackles all-time list. Tackles, I believe, are the most important stat for a middle linebacker, so that's why we're going to start here. The players highlighted are the players in the Hall of Fame currently. As you can see, Zach Thomas ranks number 5 on the all-time list of linebackers' solo tackles. Below linebackers Ray Lewis and Derek Brooks, but above linebackers Junior Seau and Brian Urlacher. And I've also included on the side a per game average breakdown, since every player's played a different number of seasons and a different number of healthy games. So I took those total averages and divided them up by games played, and that's the averages you're seeing on the side. So we see Zach Thomas averages 6.02 tackles per game, which numbers are certainly well above Junior Seau and a little bit above Brian Urlacher, and even above Derek Brooks, who's above him on the all-time total list. But it's certainly well below Ray Lewis's number. Either way, Zach Thomas is firmly in there in terms of solo tackles. Another important stat for linebackers is tackle for loss, stopping running backs in the backfield. As we see on this list, Brian Urlacher is by far and away the number one guy on the list. Thomas has 74, which is modest and kind of in the middle of the group with everybody else, and on a per game average stat is pretty much even with everybody except for Brian Urlacher, who was just a monster in that category. Forcing turnovers is also a very important part of a special playmaking linebacker. So let's take a look at forced fumbles all time amongst these Hall of Fame linebackers. Again, we see that Zach Thomas is kind of in the middle of the group. Derek Brooks leads with 24 and Sam Mills right behind him with 22. But then Ray Lewis has 19 and Junior Seau and Urlacher both have 11. So Zach Thomas's 16 kind of just sits nicely there in the middle. And their per game averages are about the same, except for Seau and Urlacher being much lower than the rest of the group. So in terms of forcing fumbles and being a playmaker in that way, Zach Thomas is right there in the middle of everybody. In turning those turnovers into points, on the other hand, he's literally in the middle of everybody. Every Hall of Fame linebacker we're comparing him to has the same number of touchdowns except for Derek Brooks, who has 7, and Ray Lewis has 1 less with 3. So this category is certainly a wash, but it proves that he's right there in the thick of it with these other Hall of Fame linebackers in terms of scoring touchdowns. Now let's take a look at some categories where Zach Thomas did not excel necessarily. Starting with sacks all time. When we look at this list, we see that Junior Seau, and especially the middle linebackers, Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher, are more than double what Zach Thomas has. Derek Brooks is the one exception who has less than Zach Thomas, but even if you look at a per game basis, Zach Thomas is well below the linebackers above him. So he did lack a little bit in this sack production. In terms of interceptions all time, the other half of creating turnovers, Zach Thomas is not good. He's really not that far below Junior Seau and Brian Urlacher, but he's certainly well beneath Ray Lewis and Derek Brooks. But if you look at a per game basis, the numbers aren't too far off from one another, but at the end of the day, Zach Thomas is still kind of at the bottom. And his pass defense productivity doesn't get any better when you just look at pass defensed. Not interceptions, just passes he knocked down. Zach Thomas is again well beneath the bar. His middle linebacker counterparts both have 96 and 90, while Zach Thomas has 48. And his per game averages don't help him out either, still being half of what his middle linebacker counterparts have from this era. So we kind of see this image of Zach Thomas being a very tackle heavy, run stopping type player, and not necessarily a pass coverage linebacker. So there's kind of his stats all time broken down, but now I'm going to look at two categories that are a little bit more abstract. So Pro Football Reference has a category called approximate value, where they try to rank players and assign them a value that they've had to their team numerically. And while not an end-all be-all stat, it is interesting to look at. Here we've compiled a list of a lot of Hall of Fame middle linebackers. And we see that with the exception of Ray Lewis, Junior Seau, and Derek Brooks, Zach Thomas's number at 148 is kind of right there in the thick of it with Mike Singletary, Brian Urlacher, Derek Thomas, and well above Sam Mills. So his value he provided as a player is right there with the rest of the Hall of Fame linebackers. Now before I get to this last category, I'd like to take a look at his stats in terms of seasons. Breaking it down year by year, we can see just how dominant he was throughout his career. He didn't just have one special season, he was consistent, including some of his best years coming in his last few. Going back to what I said about his rookie season, when he put the NFL on notice, that's because he put up 154 tackles, 120 of those being solo and 34 assists. Those were both top 5 in the NFL, and I say that because he was a 5th round draft pick. Nobody had respected him, but he immediately put respect on his name. So if we see here, I've highlighted each stat in terms of whether he was in the top 10 of the NFL, top 5, or whether he actually led the NFL in that category. And what immediately pops off the page is his tackle assists, where he averaged about 51 per season, and he led the NFL in 8 of those seasons. To put in perspective, Zach Thomas played 12 healthy seasons throughout his career, and he led in assisted tackles in 8 of those 12 seasons. Taking a look at these graphs real fast, we can see how it all kind of breaks down. In terms of combined tackles, solo tackles, and assisted tackles, we can see that Zach Thomas was in the top 10 in terms of combined tackles in 83% of his healthy seasons played. He was top 5 in 75% of those, and he led the NFL in 17% of his seasons played, meaning that out of the 12 healthy seasons he had, 10 of those he was in the top 10 in terms of combined tackles, 9 of those in the top 5. Looking at just solo tackles, the numbers do maybe dip a little bit, where he was in the top 10 in 42% of the seasons, top 5 25% of the time, and he never led the NFL in solo tackles. But the assists is where he comes back to kick some butt. He was top 5 in 83% of those seasons. In 10 of the 12 seasons, like I said previously, he was top 5 in the NFL. And he led the NFL in 8 of those 12 seasons in terms of assisted tackles. Just an absolute tackling machine. And to throw in, he was also top 10 in terms of tackles for loss one time in the 2005 season. So what this tells us is that Zach Thomas was consistently good, putting up top 10 numbers from the beginning of his career all the way to the very end of his career. These averages do not count the 2007 season in which Zach Thomas got injured after just 5 games. So after looking at these graphs and looking at by season and also looking at his career overall, I like to look at one last stat that Pro Football Reference provides us. Pro Football Reference provides players with a Hall of Fame score used to predict the odds of making the Hall of Fame based on weighted average value, the All-Decades team selections, MVP awards, Defensive Player of the Year awards, All-Pro teams, Super Bowls, Pro Bowls, and bonuses for being a semi-finalist or finalist of previous Hall of Fame ballots. So all those are taken into consideration by Pro Football Reference, and they're assigned a value, a number based off of that. So we take a look at this list of both Hall of Fame linebackers and very good linebackers who played in the NFL. We can see that Zach Thomas, according to Pro Football Reference, is a Hall of Fame linebacker. We see the average score right there in the middle at 109, and Zach Thomas coming in at 113.8. Just below Brian Urlacher's 114.23, and not too far off from Dick Butkus, but certainly beneath Jack Lambert, Mike Singletary, and Ray Lewis. But what this tells us is that all those stats and awards and selections, when assigned to a basic numeric value, do prove that Zach Thomas belongs in the Hall of Fame. So if we're looking at just stats on where he averaged in his career among the 5 Hall of Fame linebackers of his era, we see that he was averagely in the middle of them. And for his entire career based on season by season, we saw that he averaged in the top 10 or top 5 in the majority of his seasons, meaning that he was an absolute dominant player of his era. Now I want to take a look at Thomas's impact from a wider scope. How did all those stats help contribute to a defense as a whole, and what kind of awards and recognition did Thomas receive? Well, I'll start off with some awards. Zach Thomas made 7 Pro Bowl appearances, 5 first-team All-Pro appearances, and 1 All-Rookie team selection. He was also honored as second-team All-2000s. And how do these awards stack up to the other linebackers we've been comparing him to? Again, about average with the rest of them. He is at the bottom in terms of Pro Bowl appearances, with the next closest being Urlacher at 8, but in terms of first-team All-Pros, he is again right there in the middle, above Urlacher, tied with Derek Brooks, but beneath Junior Seau and Ray Lewis, but again, they're all within 1 or 2, it's not that big of a difference. He does lack in terms of Defensive Player of the Year awards, where Ray Lewis had 2 and Urlacher had 1, but just like Junior Seau, Zach Thomas has 0. And the only linebacker from this list that won Defensive Rookie of the Year was Brian Urlacher. Zach Thomas and the rest of them did not win that award. And Derek Brooks and Brian Urlacher joined Zach Thomas on the all-rookie teams from their performances in their rookie seasons. None of them won MVP, obviously. And lastly, Derek Brooks and Junior Seau both won Walter Payton Man of the Year. The rest of these linebackers, however, did make first-team All-2000s, while Zach Thomas only made second-team. And Ray Lewis, on top of that, won a Super Bowl MVP. So in terms of awards, they're all pretty much even in most categories. Zach Thomas maybe a little bit less in Pro Bowls, and he was only second team All-2000s. Next, for impact, I'd like to look at how his defenses performed overall. Obviously, Zach Thomas is just one player on that defense, but it was interesting to see how those defenses did perform with him, and I've also included a few seasons before and a few seasons after he left the team to compare how those defenses worked when he was not a part of the team. So with that being said, let's take a look at defensive ranks overall in terms of points allowed and yards allowed. So we see that Zach Thomas is drafted in 1996, and the defensive ranks were 17 and 17 in both. And they didn't get much better that next year at 16 and 26, where they actually got worse. But finally, in 1998, the defenses started clicking, and they were number 1 in terms of defensive points allowed and number 3 in yards allowed, dipping a little bit in years after that, but overall maintaining about an average between 2004 and 1998 of top 10 and top 5 performances. In fact, in terms of the 11 seasons that Zach Thomas played in Miami where he was healthy, there was only 3 seasons where his defense was not a top 10 in either points or yards allowed. And if we take a look at the overall averages of those 11 healthy seasons in Miami, we see that his defense averaged number 10 in terms of points allowed and number 9 in terms of yards allowed. So for his career, those defenses were top 10 in both categories. Percentage-wise, we saw that he was top 5 in 45% of his seasons played in terms of both points allowed and yards allowed. He was top 10 73% of the time in terms of yards allowed. So nearly half of his seasons were played at a top 5 value. So again, a theme of being consistently good. Next, in terms of defensive ranks, I'd like to look at third down percentage and red zone percentage. The averages and percentages from this will be slightly different as we are looking at just the 8 seasons where data was tracked for these numbers and that Thomas played for the majority of the games in Miami. Since from 1996 to 1998, the NFL did not track these numbers, but as soon as they did in 1999, we find that his defense was number 1 in third down percentage and number 1 in red zone percentage. Pretty impressive. Followed up by number 4 and number 8, and littered throughout his career. Again, we see top 10 and top 5 performances, and even a number 1 performance in 2003 in terms of red zone percentage. So only looking at those, again, 8 seasons that he played in Miami where the data was actually tracked and that Thomas actually played more than 5 games, we see that his defenses in terms of third down percentage averaged number 9 in the NFL, and in terms of red zone percentage averaged number 10 in the NFL. So again, top 10 in both categories, consistently good. He only had 1 season where he was not top 10 in either third down percentage or red zone percentage in those seasons. And like I said, these are all defensive collective stats, so of course he was just a part of it. And last, I'd like to actually look at his intangibles. There are 2 things that teammates would say about Zach Thomas, and that's his leadership ability. He's one of the guys that of course are first one in the building, last one to leave, and leaders of the locker room. But also, definitely his football IQ. Zach Thomas would be able to look at opposing offenses and be able to call out their plays before they happened. He was one of those type of middle linebackers. And those intangibles are backed up by testimonials of other Hall of Fame level players. So that's where I'd like to end, with some words of other Hall of Fame players. So I begin with this quote from longtime Jets center Kevin Moe, who went up against Thomas many times throughout his career, and is now a Hall of Fame center in the NFL, who during his induction speech had this to say about Zach Thomas. Quote, "Zach Thomas was my nemesis. Bill Parcells told me in front of my entire team, if you don't block Thomas, we won't win the game. Zach was one of, if not, the smartest players I ever faced. When people ask me who's not in the Hall of Fame and that I think should be in here, it's an easy one for me. Number 54 from the Miami Dolphins." End quote. That's not coming from a teammate, that's coming from division rival, longtime center of the Jets. Again highlighting the intelligence of Zach Thomas and just how much respect opposing offenses had for Zach Thomas's defensive abilities. But let's not just end there. Let's take a look at what Hall of Fame quarterback Peyton Manning had to say about Zach Thomas. Peyton Manning was asked which defender gave him the most trouble throughout his career, and his answer, quote, "Zach Thomas was one," going on to describe how their duels took place in the middle of the field, in the middle of their personal chess match. Zach Thomas studied Manning so much throughout the years that he once got in a groove during a game in Indianapolis where he yelled out Peyton Manning's plays at the line as he called them. It was a special mental battle every time Peyton Manning and Zach Thomas went on the field. Thomas enjoyed the challenge of trying to mentally outgain Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning respected him back for that effort. So let's move on from one Hall of Fame quarterback to now another, and possibly the greatest of all time. During an interview on the Manning cast of Monday Night Football, Tom Brady was asked about what defenses gave him the most trouble, and his answer was, quote, "I think those early Miami defenses of 2000 to about 2005, Brady said, saying that we couldn't complete passes. It was embarrassing. And if you watch the clip of it,
Those early Miami defenses, 2000 to about 2005.
Yes.
They lined up, as
Zach
in the
Thomas.
same front, same coverages. And I think the worst games of my career was against the Miami Dolphins.
We see that Peyton Manning immediately interjects and says, Zach Thomas, the first guy off his head from those 2000 and 2005 defenses that Tom Brady was talking about. So again, the respect. Tom Brady says out of every defense he's ever faced, those Miami defenses from the early 2000s with Zach Thomas right in the middle were the hardest he ever played against. And for the last testimonial, I like to end with a statement from Zach Thomas's head coach, Jimmy Johnson.
And let me tell you what, Zach Thomas belongs up here. Darren Woodson belongs up there. There's two players. They were key factors. We led the NFL in defense in Dallas. We led the NFL in defense in Miami. And those two players were key parts of it. They need to be Hall of Famers.
So we see that out of a wider range of guys who all had to face against Zach Thomas, they all agree that he belongs in the Hall of Fame. So don't just take my word for it. Take the Hall of Fame players and coaches' words for it. But before we conclude, I do want to quickly go over and address some of the counter arguments and detractors from his career, just to make this a little bit more even. There is no denying that he had very poor pass defense stats in terms of interceptions and pass defensed. But I would also say that it was kind of a different era of football in the NFL, and even though the linebackers such as Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher did have good enough stats in terms of interceptions and things like that, to that I say, well, that's why they're in the Hall of Fame. But I would say that Zach Thomas also deserves to be in the Hall of Fame if we look at and prioritize the tackling ability, which I think is a very important stat for middle linebackers, their ability to stop plays and make tackles. I would value that very high on my list of abilities, especially given the era of football where it was fairly still run heavy at the time. And then some people will try to detract Zach Thomas's stats by saying that he played on a very good defense with other players around him, such as Jason Taylor and Sam Madison and Pat Surtain. And to that I say it's really a BS argument. It's something that Zach Thomas, one, can't control, but also it's a two-way street. Zach Thomas helped them play better and they helped Zach Thomas play better. But I don't think it's something that you can detract from him, because those other players, like Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher, certainly definitely played on very talented defenses themselves. So either way, I think the positives of Zach Thomas's career certainly outweigh the negatives. To conclude, the point of this is not to tear down or attack other members of the NFL Hall of Fame. The players in the Hall are all deserving of that spot, but I am merely wanting to make the argument that Zach Thomas is equally deserving and should be a member of the Hall of Fame. I'm not trying to say that he's the best linebacker of all time, but I'm saying he does belong amongst the greats. And after reviewing all of these statistics that show Zach Thomas with similar level of play to other Hall of Fame linebackers of his era, I'd like for you to consider this. Ray Lewis was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Brian Urlacher was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Derek Brooks was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And Junior Seau was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Does it seem fair that Zach Thomas can only be, at best, a fourth ballot Hall of Famer, or longer, depending on when he actually gets in? Was his career that much worse than the players we compared him to in this video? I don't believe so. I think it's ridiculous that Zach Thomas has yet to make it into the Hall of Fame, and I would seriously hope he doesn't have to wait too much longer to put the final jewel on the crown of his illustrious career. And there you have it. Do you think Zach Thomas is deserving of the Hall of Fame? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please feel free to share this video with others who maybe don't know why some of us are so passionate about Zach Thomas being included in the Hall of Fame discussions. I also ask that you leave a like on this video if it's the type of content you'd like to see more of. Lastly, please consider subscribing to stay notified of future uploads and to join our growing community. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you all in the next one.